Cayla O'Connell Davis is the co-founder and CEO of Knickey, a direct-to-consumer brand that makes organic cotton undies for every day. And SFC Accredited Green Professional, Cayla launched the earth-friendly home products as the senior brand manager at Earthbound Brands to retailers such as Bloomingdales, Macy's, Nordstrom, and Bed Bath & Beyond. After completing her master's in fashion studies at Parsons School of Design, she worked as an engagement fellow at CDP North America, combating climate change by aggregating the environmental data of the world's largest consumer businesses. Cayla received her undergraduate degree at Boston University's College of Communication and currently lives in New York City. So it's kind of winding down at the end of the day for you. And yeah, we're gonna run through a conversation with Cayla, but at any point, if you guys have questions or anything, please feel free to raise your hand or slide something in the chat. We want to make this as interactive as possible. So welcome, Cayla. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, both Sophie and Rebecca, and Unpublished more broadly. It's great to connect, somewhat IRL over Zoom. Yeah, so I definitely invite, everyone who's sort of in the chat here to pop up with questions and feel free to make it really interactive. I think, conversational is sort of the goal. I didn't prepare a presentation specifically, but I'm happy to sort of tell you all about, what we do at Knickey, why we do it, as well as sort of my personal journey in coming to found Knickey as a business from an entrepreneurial standpoint. Thank you for the introduction. I think that's actually a great point of departure to sort of explain, how I came to wanting to create a sustainable business from the start. So my background was really in apparel, and I sort of dabbled in all facets of it, whether it was product design. I was a shop girl for a long time. I worked in merchandising with retailers. I've also styled like runway and photo shoots. And so when I was pursuing my master's, I had really pulled back sort of the curtain on the fashion industry and exposed, to my own personal professional development, but as well as sort of the broader industry, we began to understand, the implications of the fashion industry and the incredibly vast supply chain on the environment and our natural resources, and the detriment that it can really have to, our natural ecosystems, as well as the people who are involved in creating our clothing. And so I studied, consumer models and production schemes, and actually proposed sort of a new model for production in line with a scientific and environmental discourse known as the cradle to cradle ideology, which is really sort of adjacent to a circular economy. We're thinking about redefining this traditionally linear production scheme that your clothing goes through, from production all the way through to consumption, and then, this post-consumer end of life that is unfortunately, even in, secondary and tertiary markets, ends up in a landfill. And most of the time, since about 60% of the clothing in circulation is synthetic, that unfortunately does not degrade, and it off-gases toxic chemicals into our atmosphere, and has pretty detrimental effects on the environments in that landfill. So, I had really sort of come to understand the fashion industry as sort of this harbinger of bad at the time. And I needed to sort of negotiate my personal participation in it, and understand, okay, I love fashion. I am a great consumer of fashion. I love high fashion. I love design. I love to express myself through my clothing. And, many people view it as an art form. And how do I sort of reconcile that and reckon it against the fact that, it's associated with so much bad. And I've pulled back the curtain on that. And so I decided that I was going to, really work to make sure that as a participant and as a creator and a producer and a contributor to the fashion industry, that I needed to have a positive impact and to really understand my place as both a producer, but also a consumer of fashion. And so that's really where my journey began. In sustainability many years ago, before it was sort of a household name. I remember trying to get a job after finishing my master's degree, and most companies did not know what I was talking about. I kept being sort of directed to the PR department, maybe, and it was then that I took the role at the nonprofit CDP, which was formerly known as the Carbon Disclosure Project, and that's where we were really sort of trying to quantify the impact of a company and the products that they make from a carbon standpoint, and use that as a metric for valuation for their investors, which I felt like was incredibly rewarding. I was really fighting the good fight every day and helping these really big companies, publicly traded companies, to lessen their impact and to understand, okay, where can we reduce our emissions in the supply chain and make better choices, as a whole. But I really, wanted to get back to the product side of that, which led me to working for a branding and licensing agency in the home goods sector. And we brought organic cotton sheets to Bed Bath & Beyond and Macy's and Nordstrom, and as well as many other cleaning products, home fragrance, hard goods, even furniture we dabbled in. So it was a really interesting way to sort of see a totally different vertical of an industry, but that was very closely tied to apparel. And so at the time, sustainable fashion was very much situated in this sort of anti-consumption model. It was very focused on mending and, thrifting and resale and any sort of investment piece that you would come across that might be labeled as a slow fashion piece or a sustainable or ethical fashion piece was pretty inaccessible, actually, very expensive typically, and might feature an incredible artisan print, or be a high-end fashion design. And realistically, in kind of examining that, while there is certainly a place for that, those kinds of garments aren't necessarily going to impact an everyday customer or our behaviors as consumers more broadly. That's a special kind of piece that you reserve for, a special occasion, or that you might splurge for once a quarter, or once a year, et cetera. And so I really wanted to crack the code and figure out, okay, how can we actually educate people on a broader basis? And so that led me first and foremost to creating a sustainable garment that was a high frequency basic, something that people really wear all the time. And then in thinking about it, I came to underwear. And so, most people wear underwear every day. It's how a lot of people in the world start their day, is putting on their undies. And so thinking about it, okay, let's bring a sustainable garment to the beginning of everyone's day, and just allow someone to make a sustainable choice at the beginning of their day that they can habitualize, and that might inform other components of their lifestyle choices thereafter. So that's sort of how my personal journey came to, founding Knickey. And more broadly, beyond that, the selection of a natural fiber and working with organic cotton specifically was sort of a no-brainer for us, because if you think about it, again, going back to this sort of scary statistic that about 60% of our clothing in circulation is synthetic or polyester, that's actually basically a plastic. It's derived from crude oil and fossil fuels, and is basically, PET, petroleum-based clothing, which sounds kind of gross, which I think it is. And, you know, and a lot of undergarments are actually polyester based. And what's not great about that, aside from all of the implications in manufacturing that are associated with the chemicals and the extrusion and the treatment that they go through, you know, to sort of achieve that end product, you know, synthetics are not very breathable, and they may be very lightweight when they're moisture wicking, but they actually retain a ton of bacteria. And in thinking about undergarments, that just doesn't sound very, you know, savory. So a natural fiber was an obvious choice for us. It is much more breathable for the body, and particularly near, you know, your internal, with the direct line to your internal organs and your most intimate bodily parts. That is sort of, you know, why wouldn't you go for a natural fiber that could be better for your health and round out your wellness a lot more? And yeah, and just be more breathable and more comfortable, and then better for the environment as well. So there is both a sustainability standpoint that we are coming from very much in the foundation in our entire production scheme, and then also better for you, the wearer, and a wellness aspect. And then on, again, thinking about that cradle to cradle production scheme, we actually also have a recycling program for old undies that are expired and you need to clean out. A lot of people don't know this, but hygienists and health experts actually recommend that for hygienic reasons, you should change out your undies, replace your undies at least once a year, between 6 months to a year. And so we actually have a recycling program where you can send back your old Knickeys, but you can also send back any other, you know, Victoria's Secret, Aerie, whatever, that are old pairs in your drawer that you need to get rid of. And we will accept those. We will pay for the shipping. We give you a prepaid shipping label. And then, you know, we accept up to 200 items at a time. You can also send us your old holey socks, ripped hosiery, old bathing suits, basically anything that you really can't donate or resell. And we downcycle that into insulation and mattress stuffing or rug pads, and furniture padding, et cetera, to be just reused and recaptured, because we're really trying to divert all that textile waste from the landfill and kind of redefine, you know, the disposal habits of consumers for their clothing as well. So yeah, just really trying to close the loop on the fashion industry more broadly, and bring better products into market, and also, you know, educate people on the why they should choose these kinds of products in their daily lives.
That's
So.
super amazing. And so what are some sustainable practices do you think anyone can implement just by like starting out?
Yeah, so that is a great question. And I love answering it because it is not a one size fits all kind of answer. When you start to peel back, again, that curtain that I was saying, you know, I really like to reflect upon that time in my life as a moment of personal crisis, mostly because, you know, you just start to understand so much and it becomes a little bit scary and overwhelming and burdensome. And you're like, oh my gosh, like I have to change everything in my life. But that is not the case. In fact, you are most likely going to set yourself up for failure if you know, walk out of this discussion and think I have to change everything about the clothing I wear, the products I buy, the, you know, food I eat, the skincare, et cetera. What I would say is, you know, just starting with one small thing, and making that sort of normal at a time, you know, maybe do it for 2 weeks, see if it sticks. If it still is difficult, maybe try to focus on it and incorporate it in a different time in the day. Usually they say it takes about 28 days to form a habit. I always say a great place to start is just a water bottle. You know, don't buy a plastic water bottle, invest in one that is, there you go, you know, a canteen or something that you can refill, and just, you know, start to habitualize that. And then it will actually be easier to, you know, maybe instead of, the next time you go to buy a sponge, for example, opt for a biodegradable sponge. There are lots of incredible search engines out there actually that will help you in your, shopping journey online, that if you're searching for like a brand of Kleenex, for example, they might suggest an alternative brand that is more sustainable or has better, ingredients involved in it, what have you, that are just a better choice for the environment and better for you. So I think it's don't go home and throw everything out and replace it all, but definitely think about the next time you're going to purchase something, ask questions, look up things, read the back of the box, see what these ingredients are. If you can't pronounce any of them, maybe you want to find a different, an alternative that, has some things that you can recognize in there. And I think that goes, for clothing and for organic clothing, certainly, but more sustainable clothing broadly. There's a lot of different issues to address. Sustainability can mean one thing to you and it can mean one thing to me. To a lot of people, sustainability means ethics specifically, and fair labor, and premium labor wages. To another person that might mean air pollution and water management, or resource risk, or carbon specifically. So or broadly rather. I think that, sustainability is a tricky term in that respect. And I actually try not to use it too much and try to be a little bit more intentional with whatever issue it is that you're trying to tackle, because it's such a vast landscape. And so if you're really concerned about, animal welfare, maybe start to cut out meat in your life. Like that's another way to approach sustainability. Composting, that's an easy kind of win. You can get a little vessel and keep it on your counter and put it in the freezer and then, dispose of it at the transfer station. Or there's some really great home composting machines that I have seen a lot of people invest in during COVID, which has been very encouraging. I started keeping bees this year, which is just a small contribution. Obviously, it's a hobby and an interest for me, but it's also contributing to, food scarcity and making sure that our bee population is no longer in decline. I mean, there's so many ways to approach, making more conscious decisions in your lifestyle. And it just takes one small action a day. It's always a good place to start.
Definitely. I love that you're doing beekeeping. That sounds like so much fun. I want to get to that stage in my life where I'm ready for that. Our next question is a little more business related and big picture, but do you kind of have any advice for someone that's wanting to start a more, I know you just said sustainable is a big word, but a more sustainable brand essentially?
Yeah. So from the position of entrepreneurship, I have the exact same mentality, if you will, there's so much to tackle. And you could try to tackle it all, but I would recommend really trying to hone in on some key issues, whether that's again, like water, and wet processing. It really depends on obviously the product category that you're going into, but certainly in the realm of fashion and apparel, that is a huge issue, because of the chemicals and the surfactants and the mordants and all of the additives that go into clothing production that is highly, highly toxic. And a lot of times in these dye houses and in production houses, more broad-based, they're protected by trade secrets. And so they don't disclose those chemicals. It's pretty crazy to think about, but most of our clothing has these finishes on them that are supposed to be, antibacterial, for example, or maybe inject a scent for some reason to like always have a clean smell, or are anti-wrinkle. And you don't really think about it, but they can have harsh, heavy metals, in them, or antimony or azo colorants and formaldehyde. And these things are actually known carcinogens that are endocrine disrupting and can be linked to disease and, cancer, unfortunately. And so we prevent all of that. We strictly prohibit it based on our, the certifications that we adhere to in our supply chain, namely the Global Organic Textile Standard, Oikotex, Blue Sign, and the SA 1400 and 14,000, 8,000, et cetera. And that is a real investment that we have made, and it really limits your partnership. But actually, once if you are setting out to start a business, make a list. Just say, okay, what are the things that are really important to me? And don't just do them because you have a perception of what's important to other people. I think, go back to what are you trying to solve for? What is the issue you really want to address as, a company? And yeah, first and foremost, because you will always be motivated to pursue that. And then you'll also be coming to it from a place of authenticity, which there are a lot of brands out there who are claiming or trying to get on the bandwagon, if you will, to chase what they think is a consumer trend of interest in these things. And unfortunately, they're often misguided or miseducated, and then they unfortunately miseducate, the masses. So do your research, definitely. And, always be reading, always, attend trade shows, attend webinars. There's so many resources from trade organizations out there that are hugely helpful in navigating material sourcing, best practices in CSR, and measuring impact, carbon, et cetera. So.
Awesome. So also coming from like a business standpoint, what was one thing you wish you knew before starting your brand?
Ooh, that is a great question. I think, from a business standpoint and just more entrepreneurially, I think that I wish that I knew more about building a financial model for success. I have been very fortunate to be able to leverage experts in those fields, but it's certainly not my wheelhouse, as my background is mostly creative and brand driven and marketing, et cetera, and product. So I think that would always be helpful, but I'm very, keen to learn about it. And that's always a nugget of advice that I share with other interested entrepreneurs who are looking to start something. Obviously it's great to research and sort of learn something for yourself and try to attempt it yourself, especially if you're being very conscious about budget and investing, your resources in certain places, and be agile with your investments. But I think that in the end, you will save much more time, much more money, and much more pain, if you will, if you really leverage people who are experts and subject matter experts around those things, rather than just trying to muscle through it and hack it yourself. So.
Definitely. And just a reminder to the audience, you guys are welcome to jump in at any point. Feel free to raise your hand. We can unmute you or type it in the chat. But I guess shifting back to more sustainable practices, I think COVID has brought a lot of changes, obviously, in every industry. And I know I personally, every time I think about the amount of people doing takeout and a lot of single use things are being used, I can't help but to think about that all the time. But I guess on the flip side, what positive outcomes do you hope quarantine can have on people with their relationship with leading a more sustainable life?
That's a great question. I think that first and foremost, quarantine has definitely allowed people to be more intentional and thoughtful, I think, in, who they're spending their time with, where they're spending their energy, and, just really kind of having self-awareness. I think about everything that came out of the summer and Black Lives Matter as well. Like, we're all reflecting upon ourselves and trying to learn, and reteach ways of just navigating a social landscape. And I think that 100% permeates conscious consumption and investing in brands that are not just household names and not just run by big corporations. People are really turning toward female-founded companies, smaller companies that are really trying to move the needle in their industries and make real change and represent more people. And so I think we've already seen that 100%, just anecdotally, speaking from being a business owner. And I think that is incredible because it's the change we've been waiting for a long, long time.
That's awesome. And so going off back to like entrepreneurship, since I know venture capitalists only give like funding to 1% of women, what is it like being a female founder, and how has, being the minority within the group of the male dominated industry, how has that had a play on your company and with you founding it?
It's very interesting. I feel like being in both an entrepreneurial context 10 years ago in my career and also having started Knickey 4 years ago now, it has really shifted. I would say that, the boardroom looks a lot different, thankfully. I think that previously people were always very interested in having gray hair in the room, and that was often male gray hair. And I think now that there has been such cognizance around this changing landscape and need for representation and investment in minority-owned businesses, that inclusion has become most important. And you've seen a huge shift in people really trying to go out and intentionally, recruit people to have a diverse culture internally, but also to have representation of what our country looks like. And that goes beyond just gender, obviously, and to race and able-bodied individuals, differently abled bodies, I think, and sexual orientation as well. And I think it's hugely changed. I would say that, a couple of years ago, I think that female-founded businesses were really having a moment, and it's great. And I hope that it just keeps building upon that, certainly with respect to funding, and media coverage and, press opportunities and just really anything. I think that I'm a big believer in rising tides raise all boats. And so I think we'll see that really permeate, not just top down, but also from the bottom up.
Definitely. And I know we touched on this earlier for individuals, kind of where do they start if they want to start having a more sustainable life. But for brands that aren't necessarily centered around being eco-friendly, but do want to make an effort, where do you think is a good place to start? Is it packaging and sourcing and shipping, or is there another end to it?
So I think a really easy place to start for any company is definitely in carbon. And just understanding, what their footprint is. I think that's the first place they should start, is assessing their footprint and their GHG, do an inventory of their GHG emissions on an annual basis, and then set targets departmentally to really try to reduce those, whether they're science-based or whether they're just like, we need to, make better decisions in our material sourcing, or we need to try to get away from plastic packaging, or simply, maybe it's a team, maybe it's like a tech team and they don't sell a product, but they travel all the time. Their sales team travels all the time. Purchasing or investing in projects that offset the carbon emissions of that travel, I think, is such an easy place for any kind of company to start. And it really is cross-functional across many different industries. Companies that are, like the Walmarts of the world or the Target does actually a very good job with sustainable production, but companies that are so large, they don't, it takes a really long time for them to overhaul their factories, or they're vertically integrated, or they have proprietary production models that are not going to be easily changed to adhere to third-party certifications. An easier place to start would probably be in the packaging department, because, they can source that. And there's so much FSC certified packaging and paper goods out there, responsibly harvested tree products and cellulosic alternatives. There's such innovation in packaging these days, recyclable packaging, packaging that they can return to the company, biodegradable packaging that just dissolves in water. That is probably the next place I would start, certainly.
Awesome. And to kind of wrap up, what do you hope to, or how do you hope to see Knickey expand this year?
Yeah. Well, we have really high hopes for continued growth this year. It's been, 2020 was a wild ride for us. but I would say it was largely positive. So we're very fortunate and grateful for our community for really, getting us through. I think as a company, we are looking to hire some more people internally and expand our team. So anyone who wants to throw a resume my way, please feel free to do so. And we are really excited to introduce new product categories. We're expanding into bralettes in April, and continuing to expand our offering in colors and new styles. We are very data driven and customer centric, and we take every single suggestion you guys send our way. So if you want a high-rise thong, let us know. If you want a loungewear set, let us know. The last style we released was actually designed by our customers. So we are super amped on that. And then we finally are really excited to be expanding our recycling program, which has been hugely successful and growing so much. We're looking toward new innovations there with respect to some proprietary practices around recycling and maybe upcycling some of the materials that we collect. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This was such a pleasure. You're so full of knowledge, and you really are inspiring for what you've been able to build and continue to create. We really appreciate you taking the time to share some tips and all that jazz. So thank you again.
Thank you so much. Thank you to Unpublished and also Sophie and Rebecca for involving me. And again, please feel free to reach out. I am, very responsive. LinkedIn is a little tough for me because it's a lot of messages, but if one of you would like to forward something or share my email address, that's perfectly fine. So I'm happy to facilitate any questions I can answer, down the road and beyond. So yeah. Thank you all for your time. I hope you have a great rest of panel and, a successful week overall.